Hello and welcome to Happy Times and Places, a positively inclined Doctor Who episode commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, watch a story chosen by a friend of mine. They've picked their favourite things about each episode, so whilst I commentate along, I have to see if I can guess what that favourite thing is.
Hi there, this is Annie Wallace here. I play Sally St Clair on Channel 4's Hollyoaks. So, when Toby asked me which story would I like to talk about, I had a big think, and I have chosen Planet of the Spiders.
Well, I've just got off my hovercraft and come back into my living room to continue watching Planet of the Spiders, which has been very enjoyable so far. For those who aren't keeping up, the Pertwee era is unfortunate in my eyes in that almost every single one of the stories was for me first experienced as a target book, and then failed to live up to what my imaginary forces had done to conjure it in my mind's eye, and the addition of Flair's messy hair and from one kind of fringe to another, the fringing of the CSO, has always made it made the hairs on the back of my neck sort of itch a little bit and made me slightly uncomfortable. And then when I did Running Through Corridors with Rob Shearman, watching them on a weekly basis and watching the era all the way through, I got a much greater understanding and I think appreciation of them. And I always loved season 7, by the way. But that was partially because I think the stories were either so different or I hadn't actually read the books. But we'll get onto that when we do season 7. But Planet of the Spiders was one of the early books, was one of the best books, was a really exciting story, and I got it on video, but I got episode 6 first, which was terribly disappointing for all sorts of reasons. I'll talk on when we get to episode 6, and then I got it much later. I got the rest of it, and certainly enjoyed the first couple of episodes more than the rest. Which is unfortunate for us because now we are on part 3. Now, I'm never going to lie through all of this, but I'm going to, I am here to accentuate the positive, and I was in a great mood when we did parts 1 and 2. It's lovely to have Annie Wallace on board. I was delighted when I found out Annie was one of us, and then when she agreed to do the podcast, even more so. So, I'll never lie. But I'm here to accentuate the positive, and I think a bit of positive thinking, and trying to appreciate what the makers were doing. And I know people who I love and respect, and who I know are very intelligent and people of good taste who absolutely adore this story. So let's not say it's impossible to love. It is one of the more popular. I don't think it's as popular now as it once was. But anyway, let's get into it. But just be aware that I'm going into this slightly nervously, but that I'm not going to pretend to like anything I don't. I never do that in this. But I always try and sift through an episode, even that I think is detritus. I try and sift through it and find a flash of gold here and there. But I will never go, oh, I quite like that costume. If I don't, I'll ignore the costume and go, but that person's got excellent teeth, and or whatever. So let's see how we do, because previously for me, this is where I have found the story a challenge. And we'll find out why. But listen, I come to praise Planet of the Spiders, not to bury it. So let's see what we can do about the whole praising thing in 3, 2, 1. So it becomes a very different story this week, doesn't it? I mean, the Metebilis thing is a wonderful gag, isn't it, in a way? We had the whole build-up in the before the Green Death, and then he goes to Metebilis III, and there's a completely sort of pointless, film sequence that looks like it went to a lot of effort to basically have the joke of going, this famous blue planet of the Actian galaxy that he keeps banging on about. It's an absolute hellhole of tendrils and spears, but the Doctor gets a beautiful crystal. And, that's nice. He's got a nice crystal, and it obviously it has properties that are useful in the Green Death, and the fact that has all now come back, to round off the era, I think is very pleasing, and it gives a shape to the Pertwee era that is rather satisfying, and really feels like. And because it's not just Pertwee, but it's Pertwee and the unit lot, and we know that Terence Dix and Barry Letts were a fine partnership, who were simpatico and who remained friends. They had fish and chips every Friday up until Barry died. So it's fair to say that Barry Letts had a vision, and he was a very, very nice man. Was Barry Letts. He was a man of good intent. He wanted to, and there is a sort of moral rigor to his stories, not just the Buddhist thing, which I know is a very ham-fisted, even though I was talking with my mouth, not my hand, but you know what I mean, a way of describing something that has a lot to recommend it. If you are, dare I say it, a better person than I love the idea of meditating and finding inner peace, but I have far too itchy feet. I like the genuine sweat on John Dirth's face here. He really does look like a kind of normal guy, who's it's probably. You can imagine he's got a vest on underneath, and he doesn't have a shower. He just takes his polo neck off and sort of washes his armpits, and then puts his polo neck back on. But he's got a great face, a really sort of lived-in face. And that's a nice little sort of out of focus change of scene from Lupton to the spiders. I think the Queen Spider is a lovely prop. She's got a very I could say a very prominent back end, but she's a good shape, and she's got individual hairs on her legs, and I quite like what they do with Lupton's face here. They're trying to do that sort of. It's a bit similar to an effect they had in the Claws of Axos, isn't it? But it's gone to a bit of effort to make sure it's not just a floating head. It's sort of coalescing and moving, and it's not just completely still, which kind of then sort of covers up the CSO element of it, because it's sort of saying, well, it's supposed to be slightly sort of shimmery and slightly strange. I like the ambition of doing that, even though it's not amazing. It's very blue though, this story, and I don't know if I don't dislike the colour blue, but with Pertwee's jacket being very purple as well, and I know it's the famous blue planet, so it has to be blue. But I don't know. It's not a colour palette that particularly excites me. Whereas you can do things with sort of blue lighting effects and shadow and stuff like that. But yeah, I think that. Yeah, I don't know. I think they could have done a bit more there. But anyway, we're not concentrating on the things they could have done slightly better. This feels like a real place. And he's a real person. There's a bit of CSO, but having done the one with the. That CSO is the sort of thing that the younger me would have really sort of gone, well, I'm definitely not showing this to my friends at school. Not my friends. Friends of school were queuing up to watch old Doctor Who. But having done the maggots, I think having then going, well, let's do spiders was a fantastic idea. And of course, we know that they had a more effective special effects spider that they decided not to use. Now, Kevin Lindsay, it's nice to see him here because he's so good as Lynx the Sontaran, which I think is one of the best monster performances in the whole of Doctor Who. He was an Australian. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself from the time. He was also the partner of the guy that ended up being Nigel Hawthorne's life partner when Nigel Hawthorne died, and because it was terrible. I read about this afterwards. I think Paul Eddington mentions it in his book, that Nigel Hawthorne, wonderful English actor from Yes Minister, when he died, because they were a gay, not married couple, because I think it was before civil partnerships, or only at the very early days of them. No, I think it was actually before. It was before. Had to sell the house because he wasn't entitled to anything under law, because he was a partner in a gay relationship. A reminder that recent history, that our society allowed things to happen that we now look on and just think, well, that could never happen here. It did happen here in our lifetimes and was awful. I quite like the fact that Lupton isn't a sort of an unstable base commander, or somebody who's a scientist who's gone bad. A great man who has overreaching ambition. That's what a lot of big stories are, isn't there? They're about people who are in positions of power who have who because of that overreach themselves. Whereas this guy's just slightly pissed off. What is he, insurance salesman? And it's not supposed to be the focus, really. We get this backstory to give Tommy a chance to nick the crystal. Oh no, that's funny. I said that thing about I imagine him washing his armpits or whatever. I'd forgotten that this scene is actually about him washing his face and washing. He doesn't do his armpits. I don't think people in Doctor Who have armpits. It's a children's program, everybody. I really like Christopher Burgess here. I like the way he says, "I just came here to find peace of mind." Christopher Burgess has a very broken quality about him. As he got older, he played sort of slightly becardiganed, again, slightly sort of broken sort of characters. He's actually got a very nice part in Joss's Giants. Do you remember the football thing, which also has Jenny McCracken in it, and they're both Barry Letts regulars, although Barry Letts had nothing to do with Joss's Giants. But Christopher Burgess has that voice that slightly cracks, and I think he's absolutely perfectly cast here. Now is the time to wheel out the fact that he was one of those people that I never got to interview, and actually had given up all hope of, because he was poorly in the same facility that Richard Franklin lives in, Charterhouse. A sort of retirement home, old almshouse place, and also an actor called Robert Aldous, who was in the Dalek Invasion of Earth, and Robert said, Christopher Burgess is here, but he's got emphysema. He's quite. I think he got dementia as well. He's in the hospital. I go and visit him, and I said, I'd love to chat to him, and he said, well, I'll ask him, and he said yes, but it was the summer holidays. And so I said, well, I'll call you. I'll call you when I've had the kids and done all that. And in the course of that sort of 2 or 3 week break, I got an email from Robert saying that Christopher had passed away. I don't think I was going to get an interview out of him. I think it was just nice to go and say hello. He was at drama school with Bernard Kay and Maurice Perry, who was Captain Dent in Colony in Space at the Bristol, not the Bristol Vic, the Old Vic in London, and yes, always had that slightly wretched quality about him that as I say, as he got older, he sort of you see him occasionally in the bill as a sort of slightly sort of threadbare neighbour or whatever. Now this is great. I think I because Lupton is just a slightly irritated salesman. I I like the fact that they give him this sort of slightly fractious relationship with that spider looks great there. You are clever, Lupton. I like the fact that he's able to mentally turn the tables on the spider, but then when she goes, "Oh, you're quite clever," and he says, "I'm cleverer than most people here," and you go, "Oh, you arrogant sod." It's a nicely varied dynamic, and I think you kind of slightly admire him there, and then he blows it all by saying he's cleverer than most people here, and you go, you're a bitter salesman who's ended up in a Buddhist retreat because you're slightly sort of washed up and regretful, and you can't run properly. But nonetheless, I think this is a great episode for Lupton, who I think becomes increasingly less well served by the story. John Pertwee with his very bouffant air. I do love Sarah Jane's costume. The time is it'll all be the same in 100 years. Now that's a bit of a call back to the Demons, isn't it? Where Bert the landlord goes, "All be same in 100 years, sir," and Doctor Who goes, "I can assure you it won't be." But that there, it's a sort of country bumpkin being, officious and deliberately holding up the impatient city boys, whereas here it's the same sentiment, but it's actually being imparted as wisdom, because we're definitely on the side of the Tibetan attitude here in this story, and it's a very interesting thing to consider, because this story is about regeneration and rebirth, and I love that tinkly bell thing. Yeah, I oh, and of course the spider voices is Anne Churchman, voice of Alpha Centauri, and Kismet Delgado, another example of Barry Letts's decency. Remember Jenny McCracken, who's in Carnival of Monsters, telling me that her agent had gone bust and basically disappeared with a load of money that he owed her. So he immediately, Barry Letts, got her a job on a 9-part series or something like that meant that she was tided over, that meant that she could get herself back on the feet, that meant that she was okay. And I think he sort of twisted the rules slightly, because Kismet Delgado wasn't an actress. Roger Delgado didn't marry a member of the profession who was doing lots of work elsewhere. Kismet Delgado is an actress with an IMDb credit because she was a widow who had no insurance payout because her husband, because he was a pro, when the unit car didn't show up at the airport to take him, he jumped in a cab with other members of the crew, but because it was a cab, it wasn't insured, whereas a unit car would have been. So when it went over the ravine and killed him, he was not covered by the film or the TV show's insurance, so she got no payout. So the reason she's one of the voices of the spiders is because Barry Letts was a thoroughly decent man, and it was his way of getting her some cash together. Which is I think that wonderful voice actor Robert Rietti, I think he wrote a letter to the stage asking for financial help for Kismet. I think I came across that in one of my disappearances down the rabbit hole of dead actor factoids. That is what I call a hobby of mine. He's so good. I interviewed John Kane over he lives in France. He's got a massive collection of DVDs that Ed Stradling told me. He said he's got so many DVDs. He said even if I started watching these all now, I wouldn't have time to finish watching them before I die, and yet I still keep buying DVDs. I sympathise. His daughter, Susie Kane, is an excellent comic actress. Well, she's an excellent actress, but she specialises in sort of, comedy, cameo support, character roles in good quality comedy. Pops up in a few things. She's really good. And his son Simon Kane, I think, is a writer. So he's kept it going. I love the lighting down here. I actually Rochelle Selwyn's sets, which whereas I wasn't overly complimentary about Spiderville on Metebilis. I think her sets for the scene set on Earth are really, really good. Yeah, come on. And it's not. I think Terence Lodge here, who plays Moss, I think he's the only one of Lupton's other cronies to be in this episode. And he's a wonderful actor. He's Aurum in... you certainly did. I like the way he says that. He's Aurum in Carnival of Monsters, who is one of the greatest Doctor Who characters of all time. But he's also in the Macroterra as Medoc. And actually occasionally took a break from acting, but Barry Letts uses him now and again. But he's excellent in some early Avengers. And he's also in the Age of Kings, the Shakespeare that the BBC did in the 60s. He's a really high quality actor, but sort of was in and out of the business, and sadly he's not too well at the moment. Now that's a really good attempt at an effect. It doesn't quite work because the CSO is awful. I love Sarah's outfit. I do like a stripe, and I do like a red and white stripe, and I think I like that red and white stripe because it's also on the cover of the book. It's a shame because that could be a good shot, that one of Lupton on the background, but the CSO is so bad it's not fooling anybody. and this knows that. But you have to appreciate the ambition. Instead of having Sarah disappear and reappear, it kind of, because the camera was behind her, it sort of showed the change in her perspective. So it's an attempt to do something slightly more interesting with that companion is transported from one place to another. It's a bold effort. You can't fault ambition, but it doesn't quite work. But at least Barry Letts his, it's not a case of this'll do. It's a case of how can we make this a little bit more interesting of these sorts of things that become tropes of this sort of stuff if we're not too careful. He's got a great face, Pertwee, hasn't he? Those wonderful, sparkling, smiley crow's feet that he's got. Now, here we are on Metebilis III, which in theory really works. And I would say in practice doesn't quite. It's yeah. So here's the beautiful Joanna Munro, who I think is very young here, 1920, who went on to have a fantastic career. I was delighted to get the chance to interview her relatively recently. Fact fans, it was on the day that Tim Pigott-Smith died, because I was greeted by that news when I came out of the interview. But she was on That's Life, so she's an actress / presenter, and it's an early role for her. So when that's a good attempt to have a kind of sort of cliff edge thing going on. Oh, but here's Jenny Laird, who has had an acting prize named after her at RADA, Best Performance in a Small Role, but who had no mean career. The film Black Narcissus, she is excellent in. In fact, I looked at a couple of things she was in after this, because you might see an actress at the end of their career, something's happened, they've lost their mojo, and you get a performance like this. She's fine, she's great in an episode of Secret Army. It's not a massive part, but it's a performance. What she does here isn't even a performance. And a few people have said, well, maybe she thought that she was rehearsing, but no, because it's not a lazy performance. It's not a performance. It's like she's been whacked on the back of the head. And I mean, that, there's a real attempt to give a sense of scale there. This does feel like a big sort of open square, but and then the model work behind is suggesting that's the landscape of the planet. But and here's a thing that's gone wrong. This is Walter Randall speaking, but he's speaking with Max Faulkner's voice. Now I don't know if they mentioned this in the production text. I did. Whoever was doing it, I think it might have been Nick Pegg. I emailed back and forth and I said, "Have you noticed this?" I think they'd asked me about one of the actors. That sometimes happens with the production text. And I said, "Have you noticed what's going on there?" And I think what must have happened is something had gone wrong with the sound, and somebody must have made a note and gone, "We need to do some ADR with the guard captain," And that you've just heard there is Walter Randall's actual voice. But Max Faulkner is a guard captain in the next episode or a couple of episodes' time. And my theory is that they went, you need to get the guard captain back in because we can't hear his big speech. And they got the wrong guard captain in, which is why Walter Randall's words don't quite match his mouth. And also, it's not his voice. Because I don't think it's that they didn't like his performance and dubbed it with somebody else. Because otherwise, where do you stop with that? I think there must have been an initial sound mistake, then they just got the wrong guy in because it's too much of a coincidence that it's also a guy that plays guard captain just in a different episode. But anyway, I'm quite pleased that I spotted that, and if it is in the production subtitles, that's because of me. No, I shan't. You shan't take him. I mean, and then that sort of terrible running. My husband, my love. Why did you? Why? I mean, my goodness. I mean, I think it's possibly. Yeah, I mean, I think he's just as apter for acting alone there. I mean, as I say, I'm not even sure it can be called acting. I think it is a contender for the worst performance in the whole history of Doctor Who. And there have been some bad performances in sort of small parts where, an extra's been given a couple of lines. Walter Randall was just waiting there for her to come out. So it's kind of having trouble, isn't it, the story? Because you get to Metebilis, and I remember reading, the cast list when I got the episode guide or whatever, and you go, it's got Gareth Hunt, who's actually fine in this, who's an actor who's done a lot. It's got Rafe Arliss, who was in John Mills's Quatermass. I'd seen him play Sebastian in The Tempest, to the Prospero of Bernard Bresslaw. You can see that these guards are going to have a fight. One's Alan Chunds and one's Stuart Fell. They're both going to do a tumble. So there's a bit of Walter Randall's own voice. I love the Pertwee etiquette to, there's no. He's really good. He's not patronising or slightly sparkling or doing a bit of a nod and a wink. I'm talking to a spider. She's the Queen. He's addressing her as the Queen. I think he's absolutely brilliant at that. It's a really good spider. That I think that's for this period in the show's history, I think is really good. And here's a bit of the Terry Walsh. I'm assuming that's the Terry Walsh Doctor. But Pertwee really is. He does deliver on all fronts, really, doesn't he? He's he's charming. He's a sort of credible ambassador. Oh yes, he gets zapped here. There we go. Now was that? I've got a I was going to say I've got a feeling that was supposed to be the end of the episode. That is the end of the episode. But hereafter, episode endings go a little skew-if. As I say, we get to Metebilis. Look, Mike Yates gets top guest billing, or third regular billing, whichever you decide. Dear old Terence Lodge. Yeah, he's not too well now, sadly. I did interview him for Who's Round, and then went back to interview him for the Macra Terror Blu-ray, and I think in the end I can't bear to listen to my own voice, much as I might give the impression I like the sound of my own voice. The opposite is true. I think I keep saying things so I can't hear it. I don't know how it works, but anyway, Terry, bless him, had agreed to the interview for Macroterra, and when we got there, we were there for a long time, and we tried very hard. But he was he basically said the same thing for the whole session. Really, just kept telling us the same 2 or 3 stories. Bless him, and I think then later, not very long afterwards, went into a home where he is now. But he's okay. He's been looked after, and a lovely guy. Great, and because he's quite sort of small and weedy and has those sort of big back teeth and that slightly full mouth. You think, oh, maybe he's just somebody who can play sort of slightly, weaselly kind of characters, but he's actually got a lot more presence and a lot more versatility and a lot more spark than that. Actually, he's an actor of slightly more heft than his physicality sometimes allows, and there's been a couple of performances of his that have really surprised me because of their strength. And he's a great servant to Doctor Who. But Medoc is the sort of he is the sort of slightly panicky guy who sees the Macra, isn't he? And Aurum is the sort of snivelling lackey. Love that performance. Oh, I can't wait to do Carnival of Monsters, which somebody has claimed but still not sent me their contribution to, and that's actually been chosen by somebody who's been in Doctor Who. So I need to do a round robin of the people that have agreed to do this and not sent their videos. Now, I'm aware that I probably went a bit around the houses there, for which I apologise. I think I was more facts and compromises there than perhaps things that were amazing. So I have to think about something that I really liked about episode 3. Well, there's a few things. I like the fact we got to spend a bit of time with Lupton, and the fact that he has that. He's not just in the thrall of the spider. He's got his own mental backbone. Can you have that? His cerebellum is fortified. I was going to say by spunk then, because he's a. You say somebody's got spunk if they're, they've got a bit of chutzpah and a bit forceful. But I think cerebellum is fortified by spunk is perhaps not the sort of phrase we want in a family show. Not one that has followers who will leap on every possibility for a double entendre and bang it for all it's worth. So I like that back and forth. I actually think the spider props are pretty good. Shame about the CSO. I love the way that John Pertwee speaks to the Queen like she's a queen, and he's really he does that in Frontier in Space as well, doesn't he? He knows the decorum of the draconian court. Sometimes the Doctor goes into places of pomp and circumstance and undercuts that, and I like that. I like the anarchist Doctor who sort of goes, well, I don't stand on ceremony for anybody. I cock a snoop to authority. You have to prove that you're worth respect. But I also, at the same time, I do like a bit of decorum, and I do like people behaving properly and following certain protocols, because I believe that sort of sometimes that stuff can sort of hold us all together and remind us that we're not the most important person in the world, and I think sometimes we need to bear that in mind as well. And I like the way that Pertwee is a natural when it comes to respecting the sort of the way that you behave. And royal protocol and things like that, and I think because it fits him particularly like a glove, and it doesn't work against the fact that the Doctor is also this naughty anarchist when the Doctor wants to be. So, but I think is it going to be? So I'm tossing up between the spider props, particularly the Queen spider. John Pertwee talking to the Queen, because That's the bit that's making me smile the most. But I also do have a grudging appreciation for, Lupton. I like the fact that he washes his face and his hands, and he's got a bed, and it just seems all quite real. And the fact that he's not, somebody of high status. He's not, he's not a fallen prince. He's not a base commander. He's not a genius who's misunderstood, or who's had a taste of power and wants a bit more. He's just a slightly broken, underachieving, middle-aged man who's gone, sod it, I want a bit of power. Not for any great motivation, not for, and the slights are so pathetic, isn't it? I work for these people, and they work me really hard and didn't really respect me very much. It's hard, it's hardly, a metaphysical woe, and that makes it sort of, but it's deliberate. I don't think they've gone, who can we get to be the villain? How about a frustrated middle management type who's been put out to pasture? Because that's the most exciting kind of baddie we can think of. I think it's deliberately, the bathos there is quite deliberate, because you could have had him that he was a former minister that had fallen on hard times and was trying to get his glory back. But we spend a lot of Doctor Who time, in the corridors of power. I quite like it that we have somebody who's just a guy with a job. So I suppose because he is ill-served elsewhere, and I don't think it's a perfect performance. It's quite a strange performance in places, but I think it has enough, and I think particularly in this episode, especially as he turns the mental attack back on the spider. I wonder if I will say the combination of what Lupton stands for, his relationship with the spider, and aspects of John Dirth's performance. And I liked him having a sweaty face when he came in, and I liked the way he washed his arms. It seemed unusually sort of real to me. And I did like the way he did the unit pass thing in episode 2 as well, didn't I? And he might have a perfectly good reason for not being very good at running. So shall I say Lupton, or because it's Pertwee's last story? I do feel, and I sometimes overlook the Doctors, I do like the way that Pertwee talks to the Spider Queen. But maybe Pertwee will be my overall thing at the end. I'm just because I think this is probably his best episode, I'm gonna go for Lupton for the reasons I explained. But it's a compromise choice, because I don't think he's 100% successful, but I think in this episode we get him at his best. We get the best of him. He fulfills his potential, I think, here, ironically, for a character who feels that that's what he hasn't done. What does Annie think? What's Annie Wallace chosen for episode 3?
Episode 3, we are on Metebilis. We see Metebilis III now, and it is astonishing. It's a barren place, and the biggest kind of shock, I suppose, is when you first see the Spider Council. These spiders all sat on cushions, not cushions, on a kind of raised platform. And they are the rulers of Metebilis III, who were domestic spiders carried on a spaceship, but mutated by the power of the crystals. Yeah, this is important later on. And I think just seeing them there, it was like, wow, that's quite scary, because they were big. They were big. And yes, you could tell kind of that they were puppets, because, they didn't move as elegantly as they could have done. Doesn't matter to a 9-year-old. 9-year-olds know that things are puppets, but they still go for them, don't they? It's like, yeah, I'm going to buy into the fact that that's an animated hand puppet. And so I did. Great, that's spiders. Wow, scary. So that was the big reveal there of part 3.
And I love the way that Annie sort of is explaining the various plot elements that we're going to come back to later. We're getting a sort of previously on and a little bit of a commentary, which I'm liking. And because Annie is a very talented actress, I think you're getting a lovely performance of it too. Yes, I suppose. I suppose that the spiders themselves are a great idea, and maybe if I'd thought about it more intelligently, having had the success with the maggots, that the idea of now going spiders and preying on people's fear of spiders is a very smart move of the production, and a great story to tell within the Doctor Who context, and they make some very nice models. I suppose. I've got to be honest though with myself and go. It's always been a bit like pulling teeth for me, that a lot of those sequences, because of the CSO, which is something that haunted my childhood. I can never quite shake it. Although, as I said, loving the Queen. So maybe, and I really like Annie's sentiment there, where she pointed out that. 9-year-old, because I don't know. I don't remember. I didn't watch it at a young enough age to know whether I would have been convinced or not. But Annie's saying that when she watched it as a child, she knew they weren't real, but was prepared to suspend disbelief because you're a child and you accept things. And I think there's something that we need to talk about, actually, as viewers, about when we decided that everything had to be realistic. Now, the idea that you'd have a compromised effect or whatever is, an anathema to television makers. You would never. Whereas with Philip, when I talked to Philip Hinchcliffe about. Who's Doctor Who Revisited, he was talking about saying, I think he says in the documentary, we work on the proviso that 50% of our special effects will kind of work, but we have a go at 100%, but we think 50% is a good hit rate. So we're ambitious and we try, but we're not overly worried if we fail, not because we're lazy and not because we don't have the ambition, but because we trust that the audience know what we're suggesting and they are prepared to do the rest of the work, which is what you do in a theatre. You know that person's not going out of a door when they walk into the wings or whatever, and you see them go off and they maybe stop acting. If I'm thinking of the Royal Exchange, where I am in Manchester here, it's a theatre in the round. So, obviously they walk past you and they're no longer in the drama, but they have to get from where they are on the stage to what is outside of the theatre space, and you make a compromise. But if the emotion is real enough and the drama has been convincingly parlayed, you as an audience member have that cognitive dissonance of going, well, I know I'm in a theatre and this isn't real, and that person is now leaving the stage and going to that place that I hang around and bought an ice cream just now, and going, oh my God, I'm moved by this situation, or I'm finding this situation very tense, or isn't this a hilarious farce, or whatever. And that relies on you, the audience, having good faith. And as a comedian, I'm big on this, because a comedy gig can fail if you as the audience want it to, and some do. And it's not always that's not always a failure of the comedian, because if it's like when you see somebody there with their arms folded going, go on then, make us laugh, you go, well, I never will now, because you have set up a situation where I am up against it. You can ruin this for me. Now, sometimes you can get out of that because you can do a bit of back and forth and the rest of the audience can get behind you or whatever. But a gig is fairly easy to torpedo if that faith between audience and performer breaks down. And I think that the audience and television makers enjoyed a similar sort of faith when I was growing up watching television, that you knew that Juliet Bravo's police station was a sort of three-walled set, but you also believed that everything you were watching was taking place in a police station, because you didn't say to the television makers, unless you convince me that this is real, I am not going to believe the drama that plays out within it. And I remember an old and wise comic, Jeff Innocent, who's not a classic TV fan or anything like that, but I remember him saying to me, when was it that television decided that everything had to be totally 100% believable? Because production values have got so much better. you know, and there's yes, there's the idea that an audience today would watch something where there was something that wasn't realistic looking, so would then take you out of the drama, would be unacceptable, would be would not be transmittable really today. And I'm not sure that we've benefited from that. I don't see. I mean, I suppose it's better, isn't it? The television has got technically better, but I always think if an audience, uses the muscles between its ears, does it? But then again, all the television today is brilliant, and audiences aren't stupid. So maybe it's just me being nostalgic for. Or maybe it's me even patting ourselves on the back for going, well, we could watch this, and even though maybe I'm giving us credit for a skill that you don't need anymore. So why miss it when actually television is now technically so much better? You don't have to worry about that. And maybe there's some truth in that. Maybe I've just talked myself out of a great theory I had about television being brilliant when it wasn't necessarily realistic. But I don't think audiences gain anything from saying, well, I can, the onus is all on the television maker. I think as an audience, you have to collude in the illusion. Yeah. And also have good faith, It's hard to make television. Just technically, it's hard to make television. That if a coherent piece of television is actually quite a hard thing to put together. So the fact that so much of it is as good quality as it is, and I respect people who make things, I think, and so I get touchy when stuff is dismissed on what I think is an unnecessary basis, maybe. I don't respect, and I think that goes down to that kid who was paranoid about CSO, meaning that his friends would laugh at his program that he loved, and that's partially because I thought bad CSO looked bad as well, but that doesn't matter. But I think it's all comes from me being protective of Doctor Who, but also of me saying, well, it's obvious that CSO is not very good, so why do you have to spend so much time sort of chortling at it and laughing at it and dismissing it? Why don't you just get over that and then, try and see through that and into actually the more important aspects of the storytelling? But that's because this is my thing and I love it. And it's interesting, I've done this sort of defensive monologue about people not seeing the best in things on an episode that I've been largely critical of. So I'm probably a terrible hypocrite with double standards. Or am I? I don't know. It doesn't really matter, does it, in the great scheme of things? Don't say that, because that means that this is all a colossal waste of our time. Oh, dear. I'll tell you what, I think I'm going to go away. I really enjoyed episode 1 and 2, and I actually thought I did quite a good job of the commentary on episodes 1 and 2. I don't think I've done a particularly good job on episode 3, which is annoying because I felt like I was on a roll. So I think I'm going to go away and become reborn as a new man for episode 4, which would be thoroughly appropriate considering the story that we're watching. So I'm now going to go and shout at myself for my own shortcomings. I'm going to turn the air blue, which once again is very appropriate. Happy times and places. Goodbye. Well, thanks ever so much for listening to Happy Times and Places, which is presented by me, Toby Hadoke. My special guest at the moment is Annie Wallace, who can be found on Twitter at Annie Wallace and on TV in Hollyoaks. My thanks to Annie and to the many patrons who make these podcasts possible, and they include Philip Marsh, Daryl McLean, Nate Lynch, Jacob Lumley, Andrew Llewellyn, Andrew Lester, Neil Little, Andrew Larson, Pete Lack, Hendrik Korzeniowski, Andy Kitching, Matthew Kilburn, William Keith, Judith Jackson, Andrew Jolly, Robert Jewell, Paul Ingerson, Darren Howard, Matthew Hooliston, Sam Hollingsworth, Simon Hodges, Stephen Hill, Matthew Herbert, Legion Henderson, Paul Hayes, Ronald Hayden, Duncan Harvey, Steve Hatcher, Susan Harrison, Hammer House of Podcast, Aaron Gullias, Paul J. Guest, and Robin Groen. And the music is by Dave Gates, and the podcast artwork by Dylan Patterson. Well, if you would like to join that list, please go to patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. One of the joys of being a patron is that you occasionally get your name mentioned on the credits, but that's not the only lure. You get advance releases, you get bonus releases, you get exclusive releases and access. The patrons are currently 6 months ahead with Happy Times and Places, and they also get a podcast called Far Too Much Information, which is available nowhere else other than Patronville, and also a monthly AMA with me and other sorts of things. The tiers start from as little as £3 a month, and most things are available on the lowest tier because I'm not commercially minded and I hate the idea of withholding anything. There are a couple of sort of little trinkets as you go up the ladder, but actually nobody's claimed quite a lot of them because as I say, everything is pretty much there at the £3, and you can get a 10% discount on the £3 and indeed any of the tiers if you sign up for a year in advance. That means I've gotcha. But you withhold 10%. And you can do that, as I say, patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. If you can't commit or don't want to a monthly thing, you can go to kofi.com/Toby Hadoke. If ever there's a reason you particularly want to just chuck me whatever denomination of cash that you like, if you've particularly liked a podcast, or you think I sound hungry, or you're just feeling generous yourself, you've got a tax rebate or something. But look, I don't expect money because I know how difficult finances are at the moment. Just seen my electricity bill shoot skywards. So I know we're all in the same boat. It just means a lot that you're listening to this stuff, and I hope that my wittering is of some value to you. So look, if you want to go to iTunes or Podbean or wherever you get your Toby Hadoke's Time Travels podcasts from, and give these a 5-star rating and a few lines of review, that really helps to separate these from the crowd and to increase the traffic and mean more people listen. And that would make me very grateful indeed and costs you absolutely nothing. Would you like to follow me on Twitter? You can, at Toby Hadoke, TobyHadoke, and these podcasts have their own stream feed, Twitter identity at Hadoke Podcasts, Hadoke. You can also follow my comedy club, Excess Malarkey, which has been going for 25 years, and I've been comparing it since day one. It's in Manchester every Tuesday at 8 p.m, and we have acts from the national and international comedy circuit all glued together as affably as I can. Yep, by me. Excess Malarkey Comedy Club in Manchester. Well worth a listen. I'm on Instagram too. It's largely pictures of my dog, and you get more of those if you're a patron. Every Tuesday, there's a Bernard picture. So that's enough whoring me about, really, isn't it? So, do all that if you want. I'm sure you've got better things to do. I'm not very good at this advertising lark, but patrons keep these ad-free. I mean, actual ads. So that's something, isn't it, in this day and age? So here we are. I'm about to go live with this. I'm actually 5 minutes late with this for the patrons. They usually get a release at midnight, but I'm sure nobody's staying up just to get this at the actual time. But I like to be punctual. But I may as well use this post-credit time, as well as apologising to anybody that's hovering over their computer at midnight, is that for some reason the name Minnie Moke entered my head while I was watching The Chase. Not The Chase, as in the Doctor Who story, and not The Chase, as in the TV quiz show, or has been pointed out, I think, was it by David Gillespie? Hello, David. One of the many lovely patrons, not The Chase, the 2006 BBC drama. There's other Chases. Let's not Lorraine Chase. Whilst I was watching The Chase in Planet of the Spiders, episode 2, I mentioned the word Minnie Moke, And as Andrew Llewellyn points out, that's the transport for the prison guards in the novel of the Sea Devils. John Deere pointed it out too, and also pointed out that the Minimokes are the little cars in The Prisoner as well. But sometimes, I probably, if I'd sat and thought about it, but sometimes my head just throws little things in just to activate an I think you'll find out there. So yeah, because obviously in the TV version of the Sea Devils, they're citrons, aren't they, with the doors removed, and that is because Michael Brant's wife was French, and so he'd seen them there, but they weren't over here yet, or they were new. So anyway, they were. So that's how he decided to use those. But yes, in the book they are Minimokes, which are the little things that are in the prisoner, and nothing to do with the gyrocopter, of course. I'm 48 years old, and I'm not good at vehicles. I've never driven in my life, and I just remembered the words mini and moke went together for something Pertwee-esque and a vehicle, and I think that's enough to go. Here's a load of vehicles and Pertwee. That has made them. That has awoken the Moken. That has made the Minimoke awoke in my addled old mind. Anyway, there we go. I better get this out to the patrons. While they get this, when they get this, it'll still be warm. Whereas by the time you get it, if you're not a patron, if you're listening to this and you're not a patron, it's past its sell-by date. It's probably off. But I hope it's still good, because that's a terrible way to advertise. Yes, the thing that you've just consumed is probably going to give you ear poisoning. Yes, anyway, but it's not. It's just no longer topical. Not that it's a topical podcast, so that's fine. It's like UK Gold. By the time you heard it, probably a lot of the people involved had died. I might have done. I don't know what I'm doing in 6 months. I don't think I'll be able to pay my electricity bill, but I know I'm not alone. Well, listen, I've had plenty of opportunities to stop this podcast, and I haven't yet, so I'm going to now. Goodbye.